Good morning and happy Tuesday to everyone. My name is Robert Hersey, and on behalf of FATA, welcome to today's webinar titled The Power of a Trauma-Informed Approach in Early Childhood Education. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration between the Florida Department of Children and Families and FATA. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them to all panelists by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. We will be answering questions throughout today's presentation. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. For computer audio, click Communicate menu, then click the Audio Connection panel. Click Disconnect, click Communicate menu and Audio Connection again, then click Call in using the computer, and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I Will Call In option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password will be posted in the chat panel momentarily. Please note you must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a statement of credit. We are unable to verify attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via a computer or mobile device. Therefore, call-in only attendees are not eligible for a statement of credit or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through FATA. A statement of credit and CEUs for up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar. CEUs are available for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credit or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Friday, February 28th, 2025. At the end of today's webinar, you will have 3 opportunities to complete the evaluation: a link posted in the chat, a follow-up email from WebEx, and an automatic web browser pop-up when we end the webinar. To complete the evaluation, you will first need to register or sign into your FATA account. Please ensure your name and email address match the name and email you used to register for today's webinar. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your license or certification number when you register. If you need assistance with account registration, login information, or assessing the evaluation, fill out a contact form on our website or email training@floridabha.org before February 28, 2025. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure times of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in the professional development section of your FATA account. For licensed practitioners, CEUs will be reported to CE Broker within the same time frame. This presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, information, and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, FATA, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Our presenter today is Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen has more than 15 years of experience in behavioral health at the local, regional, and state levels. In her role at Community Coalition Alliance, she works with community coalitions, providers, and partners to assess substance use trends through data collection and analysis, conduct research, partner engagements, capacity building, and community assessments. Mrs. Roberts also provides ongoing technical assistance and training and serves as a master trainer for Florida with the Substance Abuse Prevention Skills Training curriculum, supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Prior to joining Community Coalition Alliance, she worked at the Florida Department of Children and Families Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, serving as the clinical team lead, Florida's National Prevention Network designee, and the state epidemiology work group lead. She received her Master of Science in Criminology from Florida State University and a Master of Science in Criminal Justice from the University of Central Florida. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen, I will turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction and thank you for having me here today. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to be here. As you mentioned, my name is Kathleen Roberts. Today, we're going to talk about the power of trauma-informed approach in early childhood education. I really love this topic because so much of the trainings that you've seen on some of these webinars, we talk a lot about the impact of the adverse childhood experiences. We talk about the impact of trauma over the life course. Today's conversation is going to be talking about what are some of the things that we can put in place to buffer, to help protect our young people before any of these things that we've been talking about become a major issue. So I'm excited that that's going to be our focus here today. It brings a little bit more of an optimistic, hopeful approach and understanding of our system of care, and a lot of good conversations for what can we do about it instead of just moving forward with the aftermath. So I want to talk a little bit also about who we are. So I'm with the Community Coalition Alliance. We are a coalition of coalitions. We bring together coalition partners and community organizations that are working towards the health and wellness of all Floridians. We try to come together as an opportunity to align our different efforts to leverage the work that we do to be able to make that larger impact across our various communities in Florida. We're here to look for that vision of community that works together by providing a safe and healthy environment for everybody to thrive. Our organization covers all across our state of Florida. We provide a number of different roles as a coalition of coalitions. Part of it is the opportunity to have a membership alliance and bring people together to talk about the barriers, challenges, success stories, brainstorming for new approaches and ideas. We also have opportunity for some funding and oversight for some of our members. We do a lot of work in the training and technical assistance arena to ensure that we're all working in the same direction, using evidence-based approaches and ensuring that we are up to date with the latest and greatest research of what's happening. And we also provide a lot of opportunities for partnership engagement. We have a much larger chance of creating that change over time if we're all working together. So that's just a little bit about who we are. Again, we cover various counties across our state in the Northeast region, Southeast region. Actually, now we also are in the South Central region as well. So excited to be able to expand that reach and that connection across our various communities. Today, in our conversation, we're going to talk about to increase our understanding in the impact of trauma and toxic stress on brain development and learning in young children. We're going to identify effective practices that incorporate a trauma-informed approach for early childhood education. And we're going to increase the knowledge of how to support resilience for all children, including those who have experienced trauma. As I said at the beginning of this, I really enjoy this topic because it gives us that opportunity to think about ways that we can create that long-lasting change for our young people. We talk so much in other presentations and webinars about what happens when people grow up through these things, what happens when all of these things kind of bubble up later on in life. But here we can talk about what are some protective buffers that we can put in place to make sure that we're countering these things that are occurring in some of individuals' lives. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit here with what we're talking about. What does that population look like? And what are the ways that we can work to address this young population? In our country here today, the latest estimates, we have about 22 million individuals under the age of 5. That's quite a few people. Almost half of infants and toddlers are under non parental care, which means that they are being taken care of outside of the household. More than two-thirds of children have parents and caregivers in the workforce. So that puts a very large percent of that 22 million in the care of somebody else outside of the house. What we also have seen is that the Head Start attendance has increased by 5%. Even though we've seen some decreases over time, we have started to see that increase happening here. And so when we get into this next discussion, we're talking about a very large percent of our population, of these young children who have that opportunity for us to be able to play that pivotal role to buffer against some of these traumatic stressors and toxic stress that are occurring in their lives. And we're going to talk about how can we make that happen and how do we work with all children to make sure everybody is working forward and able to thrive to the best of their ability into what is available for them. So when we talk about early childhood education, there's a couple of different categories that we are focusing in here. So early childhood education covers childcare and it covers some of the education pieces. So the age category goes between 0 and 8. So we have the infant category, infant to 3, that combines the infant and toddlers. Then we have the category of ages 3 to 5. So we're talking about the pre-kindergarten. So we're talking about that VPK time frame, and then we go in from kindergarten to third grade. So the types of early education platforms and areas that you'll see in your community will include preschools, childcare centers, sometimes it's private homes, elementary schools, there are special educations, and then support services. So early childhood education covers a whole grouping of different places that young children get in contact with, whether it is specifically for childcare, whether it's for education, or a combination of the two. This is the time that is, yes, there is some of that academic focus, but there's also a lot of the social interactions that are developing, evolving, and strengthening through this time period. So when we talk about that early childhood education, the reason this becomes such a critical time frame for young people is because this is the time that we're seeing the foundation for learning and development. And this is a lot of the skills that young kids are picking up for the thinking process, for the engagement, the social interactions. Early childhood education is also a place that protects children against poor health and mental health outcomes later in life. This is the stage that also helps to promote young children's social and emotional development. It also helps to prevent and reduce those negative effects of early trauma, which we'll get into a little bit more here in the next few slides. And key to this too is it strengthens language and communication skills. A lot of the things that we study when we talk about some of the negative outcomes that happen from substance use or some of those issues that evolve during school time is they relate back a lot to communication, anger management, all of these things. And early childhood education can be that great pivotal point that helps to assist with the regulation of those emotions. It helps to assist with those communication skills of how to be able to share across what you're trying, the message you're trying to reach, how to be able to engage with those that are around you. So in this time frame, we have so many of those opportunities. And Robert, I'm seeing a couple of comments in the chat that there's audio issues and possibly the slides are not advancing. Can you see okay on your end?
I can. I will post in the chat some instructions here in just a moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Yeah, so if anybody's having any issues, please type it into the chat. They'll take care of it on that end. But I'll go ahead and keep on moving. And all of the slides that you see here today will also be available after the presentation, and also the listing of the citations from where the information came from. What we also see is that research supports the importance of early childhood education for a number of things. Research has shown that this is the time that it strengthens that language and communication. We see better social skills, greater confidence, more coordination, and increased creativity. These are all critical components for the long term outcomes for positive engagement, for attaining success in school, outside of school, the relationships for friendships, and outside of that, communication, to be able to go in, different workforce environments. All of those different things are really important, and they start this young, in this early childhood education, because those are the skill sets that you begin to learn, and then you get to practice them over time. So, high quality early education is actually seen in the research to provide lower costly remedial education and special education services. Though the return on investment for high quality education, or early childhood education, is amazing in what we're seeing in the research. Positive outcomes for the school, positive outcomes for the community, positive outcomes across the board. So it really is a great opportunity. Again, this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about talking about this particular topic, is that we actually get to see how we can implement things to see those positive outcomes and to see the hope that brings out, instead of always reading and researching of the after effects. And so much of this research does support that opportunity to be able to see these positive outcomes. So, today's conversation, we're going to get into how these early childhood education settings provide that opportunity to buffer against the negative impact of trauma and toxic stress. This is the time that you get to see that interaction, because that, as you saw from the first slide, 22 million kids are under the age of 5, with half of the infant and toddlers being in out of home care. We have a lot of young kids in the VPKs, kindergarten. So this is our chance to see how can this setting that is going to be provided to all children coming through have that opportunity to really help and push that positive outcome for our young people. And really, if we are applying everything that we talk about here today into all of those different settings, and we apply them in a way that's going to be beneficial to young people, we're going to have so many better outcomes for kids as they go through the rest of the education system. And then after that, whether it is higher ed, whether it is vocational, whether it's wherever they go beyond that, we can have the opportunity now to really be able to help and stop some of those negative consequences that we know exist based on the research of, like, the adverse childhood experiences and other traumatic stress issues that we see in the research. So let's get into defining trauma and toxic stress. And what does that mean? And why is this having such an impact, especially at this young age? So we're going to talk about trauma. What is trauma? So, trauma is this pervasive problem. It happens as a result of incidents that you experience through events that can have long lasting impacts, whether we're talking about things that are physical abuse, emotional abuse. It could be something that you experienced and it was a near death experience. It could be neglect. We could be talking about poverty. Trauma comes in a variety of different ways, and the way that it impacts individual also, it varies by individual. Violence in the community, war, uh, a lot of these different things that have that impact on the emotion, the well-being, and what we see for that impact on young kids as they're developing and trying to understand the world around them. So, trauma has an emotional response, and that leads to those physical and psychological harms. So, when we mentioned here, what are the kinds of traumas that we're talking about? We're talking about, things like abuse. emotional abuse, physical abuse, the maltreatments. We can also talk about some of these traumatic experiences that have been formally identified in DSM-5 criteria, and then the adverse childhood experiences that many of us on the webinar here today are very familiar with and aware of, based on some of the other previous webinars that we've had here on FATA and some of the research that's been done into this. We even have now the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey, including these questions in there so that we can begin to really gauge the impact of ACEs on our young people in our state of Florida. So there's a lot of great information that this kind of helps us to understand. And what we're finding is as we go through these things, we're really understanding just how much of an impact that is happening at that very young stage. So we've talked about the adverse childhood experiences, and there's a listing of different categories that this relates back to. We talk about the physical piece, we talk about emotional, we talk about some of the other components, the challenges that they're experiencing in the household, things that are generational, impact of incarceration, substance use, violence, all of these different things that have been seen to have an impact on people as they get older. That impact has an effect on them physically, it has an effect on their health, it has effect on them emotionally. And the amount of impact this has across our population is pretty big. The latest research we saw, it's about 64% of adults in the US report that they've experienced at least one type of ACE before the age of 18. Nearly 1 in 6 report that they've experienced more than four or more types of adverse childhood experiences. And we know once you have 4 or more, the chances of some of those negative outcomes increase significantly. So this is a topic that is of great concern, and understanding the impact of this is really important for this particular age group, because it doesn't mean just because you have adverse childhood experiences that you're doomed for life. The good part is that we're seeing in research is that there are ways to counter, there are ways to bring in those positive childhood experiences, there are ways to also bring in this additional support, those buffers. And what better time frame to bring that in at the early part of that young childhood period, when they're learning, when they're developing, their brains are maturing, they're learning skill sets from social skills, how to interact, communicate. This is our opportunity to be able to address some of these things and bring that into a stage in life that is so critical, and it also brings so many positive outcomes. So when we talk about trauma, there's a variety of different kinds of trauma. We've got the acute trauma, we've got complex and chronic. Acute trauma is the unexpected single incident trauma. Complex trauma usually involves experiences during the upbringing, during growing up, things that you experience during childhood. And then chronic trauma are experiences that happen repeatedly and they're prolonged, but they can happen during early childhood years. It can happen as an adult, it can happen at any time. So those are kind of the three categories that we can think of when we think about trauma and what those effects are. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I know I'm talking a lot here, but if you have any additions or you have questions, please feel free to chime into the chat. Diane, thank you so much for putting that in there for hurricane impact. That is a great example of a trauma. For some, it could be just the amount of news coverage that was constant during some of the hurricane seasons that bring in this fear. And for young kids, this can have a serious effect on them. Now, depending on where you were in Florida, some of those experiences really had that impact of being more traumatic than others, whether it was during some of the flooding that occurred, the tornadoes that came through it. So those are some great examples. So thank you, Diane, for putting that in there. Other examples, in addition to hurricanes, which we're familiar with here in Florida, can be things like car accidents, other natural disasters that could happen in other parts of the country. You've got earthquakes, we have fires. They can be just regular storms with tornadic events that happen. But then there can also be things like an assault, a violent crime, something that happens that is just these specific, very one time events that have that long term impact. And I think somebody else just put something else in the chat. Oh, yes, being removed from their home, going into foster care. So, some of those specific events, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of these the next example. But as we think about some of these acute traumas, they also can vary from person to person. We all react, and it's that emotional reaction. It also happens to be with what is around you. What are those buffers that are helping to counter some of these things? And that minimizes or amplifies that impact of that specific traumatic effect. So, some of the symptoms that kind of come with having that acute trauma can be things like anxiety, difficult concentrating, flashbacks, avoidance. Nightmares, and it can be even just this one-time event, but it had made such an impact that they will show up in these types of um, examples. So I've talked with other families that have gone through hurricanes, and ever since being in one of those pretty bad hurricanes with major flooding coming inside, what they've shared is with their kids. Sometimes now, even if it's starting to rain, you can see some of those emotions start to flare up. It's not a hurricane season, it's not even a major storm, but it brings back the feeling of that fear. Of the hurricane, that you'll start to see some of these anxiety and the flashbacks, that even small things that are not even close to what that traumatic event was can still set off that type of an impact and a reaction from the individual. So when we think about chronic trauma are the things that are happening on a more over time. It's happening repeatedly. It's prolonged, and it can happen whether you're in early childhood, through adolescence, or later on in life, because these are events that tend to happen and over time. So it could be domestic abuse, it could be war, it could be homelessness, but they are prolonged and they happen whether you could be young, you could be older, whatever that may be. Um, so when we talk about these things, we're talking about things that are not a one-time thing. They happen over time periods, and they could happen over time periods, stop a little bit, and then come back as well. The types of things that we see here for the responses and some of those symptoms are, you see a lot of the feelings of shame, you see a lot of the guilt, trouble regulating emotions. Chronic pain is actually something else that comes with that reaction response to these types of chronic trauma events. Anxiety disorder, depression, all of these things have that effect of how it's showing up in individuals. And again, every individual is different, and it also depends on what are those supports that are around them. Are there any buffers? Are there any supports? Those types of things. Donna, thank you for putting that in there. Yes, hospitalization, that could definitely fit into this, for some of the times of spending in there, and those things can come in waves. So that's a perfect example. Thank you. I appreciate the audience chiming in, and I would encourage others, if you think of some of these examples, please feel free to put it into the chat. We learn a lot more when we're engaged and having conversations and keeping that going. Um, then we have complex traumas. So with complex traumas, excuse me, this refers to a series of traumatic events that are experienced over a long period of time. They could be months, they could be years, but they happen for longer term periods. So we're talking about neglect, we're talking about prolonged exposure to domestic violence, medical abuse. We can have being in situations that have some negative effects. For we brought up war in the last one, but it could be even living in a war zone. It could be living in places that have constant violence that is happening. And so this brings to a lot of those reactions, that you saw in some of the other ones, but it's even more. So where you also have issues, and they can show up in things like um, memory lapses, the need to always be on alert, trouble sleeping, low self esteem, negative self perceptions, chronic illnesses, also having some of these things evolving into physical symptoms also has a way of showing up for these types of things. And Diane put in here parents with mental illness that are untreated, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression. Yes, those kinds of experiences, because those, again, are those prolonged over time. It's not just a one situation, and it's not just, happening at one point in life. It can happen throughout, whether you're talking about also childhood, but then also these children as they move into adulthood as well, especially if it's left untreated. So these are just examples from those three different categories of the types of trauma and the types of responses that you may see in individuals that are experiencing those types of trauma. So knowing that and understanding this is really important as we go into the next few slides of understanding, well, what does this mean and what can we do about it? So we've talked about the traumas. So now let's talk a little bit about toxic stress. So toxic stress occurs when there is that excessive prolonged activation of that stress response. We're going to talk a lot more about the brain and its impact with trauma and brain and the toxic stress and how that evolves and why that is so critical for us to have this conversation. We're talking about early childhood education because those are the time periods of that brain development. And that's where we know the research shows this has an impact on our brain, on our body, physical, emotional, mental. So understanding that is really important. There's intergenerational transmission of the disparities of how this affects individuals long term. Um, there still needs to be a lot more research done into this. We have learned so much, we know a lot, but there's still so much more that we're trying to understand in that relationship of being trauma informed. Of what does that look like? How does it show up in various settings? How do we help not just those that are in the early childhood education setting, but also help the family members that they interact with and other caregivers that are part of this. Um, so it's really important as we discuss this of why this toxic stress is so critical for us to understand, because that has an effect on that developing brain, on the physical ailments, on a lot of the things that we see showing up later in life. So, childhood trauma and toxic stress has absolutely significant harm that can occur. There's the neurodevelopment and functioning, your social and emotional competence, and executive functioning. This is the time period where that brain it's developing. All of the different pieces are coming together. You're learning skill sets to get your brain stimulated and moving and learning and wanting to try different things. When we talk about the impact of this, is really important to understand why at this age it is so critical that we put in these buffers. We've got Heather, thank you for chiming in. So, immigration from another country, bullying, prejudice, any of the isms can also initiate a traumatic response. It can absolutely. And again, it's what happens, like the prolong some of those stressors, that some of the trauma that comes with it. What are some of those things that affect? But also, what is that support system or lack of support system that's around you? Every individual is going to react a little different, but it also has to do with what you have in there to help buffer and kind of counter those things. What are some of those positive childhood experiences that can come in and help to com- compete against it? So, those are the things that we also have to be thinking about. And this to me is such a powerful image, because when we talk about that early childhood, and we talked, the very first slide, we said there are 22 million kids under the age of 5. 22 million. That's a lot of people. And so if we just think about that number, 22 million under 5. Now, when we talk about the importance of early childhood education, this is also why 90% of a child's brain development happens before the age of 5. And then from there is when that last portion, which we know a lot more about, that prefrontal cortex. We've talked a lot about that in other webinars when we talk about the impact of substance use on youth, because that brain doesn't finish developing until you're into your mid to late 20s. But the rest of that brain, 90% of it has been developing before that age 5. So those opportunities for us to be able to come in and buffer against some of these traumas, some of these toxic stress impacts, this gives us that opportunity for that early educator to be a part of what is considered, and I love this term, brain architect. What an amazing kind of term to uh, see yourself in your role as an educator, that you get to be a brain architect. This is that time period where you have that opportunity to help mold, to help counter the negative effects, to give every child that opportunity to become successful, to give every child that opportunity to be able to be the best that they can be, to be able to find success in whatever that success looks like. For some, it's moving into higher ed. For some, it's finding that specific thing that you really enjoy doing, whether it's a trade, whether it's something that you want to be a part of the community for. This is that time frame that we get to counter and push against all of those negative things that we talked about when we talk about those traumas. We can't, you know, control everything outside of that setting, but we do have that opportunity inside those early childhood education settings to be able to do something to help with that development of the brain, to help to promote and increase those social interactions, to help and increase that opportunity to grow and be able to have the successes in life like everybody, which is fantastic. So I really love that term, brain architect, and I think it's very powerful. And it gives a little bit of that perspective of just how important that early childhood education is. We're not talking about this is, I always find it interesting when I have 2 kids and we were looking for daycare, and you don't realize that why it matters so much where you wanna go, and why you wanna put together, a place that's going to be, helpful for your child's development until you start to think about just how critical this time frame is. So it's not just a place of childcare. This is a place where individuals that are going to interact with young kids from under 5, they're gonna be a part of that brain architect team. They're going to be there to assist and support in this evolution. So it is wonderful. But it's also really important for us in the field to really understand why this time frame is so critical. So here we have the brain. So when we talk about that brain development and we talk about traumatic stress, there are effects that these experiences have on that brain. That executive state, the prefrontal lobes, those are the things of what can I learn from, what can I do. That's the part that really finishes that development later on. So your mid to late 20s. But then we've got your emotional state and your survival state. So those are the things here that kind of play a major role, and those are getting developed and formalized during this critical time period. And those are the things that are going to have an influence on some of those outcomes that young people will have. So it's really important that we realize that just how valuable this time period is in an individual's life. And if we're really wanting to see that return on investment for our society and community, we would invest a lot of time and support and funds for this age frame, because that is just how powerful it is for long term. Um, the quality of child and caregiver relationship has also that effect. So if we're saying this is a time period for that brain development, these early educators are the brain architects, then these are the times that we need to think about what is happening in that relationship. What are we seeing with that communication? So, this is that time to be able to provide that stable, responsive, and nurturing relationship. It is an opportunity to give those positive experiences and to, with this phrase, I love it, to build that architecture. This is the chance that we will have to be able to ensure that we're pushing back against those the traumas, pushing back against those toxic stressors, and being able to provide the opportunity for more of that stable relationships, for building that nurturing relationship. But also, this is the time that you're teaching those things for the young kids to be able to learn as well. Without those positive relationships, we're going to limit opportunities. And those limited opportunities will not allow young kids to be able to practice those cognitive skills, to practice the social interactions, and to build up that emotional skill set. I mentioned at the beginning here, one of the issues that we see when we talk about some of the negative effects, they stem from a lot of the lack of being able to regulate anger, so that anger management, and they stem from the lack of being able to communicate. So a lot of the kind of anger with the lack of communication and kind of the reactionary approaches leads to some of these behavior issues that we see showing up at school. That's why even a lot of the evidence-based programs that have been put in practice related to substance use, they have so many components in there that go back to anger management, communication skills, regulating those emotions, because those are the things that have an effect. So it's just really important that we realize just how much of a influence and power this has on our young people, and why it matters for us in this field to be able to remind each other of, this is the time that we build up those protective factors. This is the time that we help to teach these social skills. This is the time that we have to help to teach that emotion regulation. It's not innate in all of us that we wake up one day and we know and we have all these skills. We have to learn them, which means we have to teach them. So it is very critical. This is that time frame that it gives us that opportunity to really reduce some of those issues that we see in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then, of course, beyond. So, that toxic stress really has an impact on the brain. Um, this is really important for us to understand. So when we think about, well, why do we talk so much about adverse childhood experience? Why do we talk so much about trauma? Everybody experiences life. Everybody has trauma in their life. Uh, well, it may be, but what we have to understand is that some of those stressors, some of those traumas, without the support system in place, is actually having a massive effect on individuals, from the piece that affects learning, memory. When I mentioned the three different types of trauma, the some of those, the way it shows up with memory issues. It shows up with anxiety. It shows up with all of those things that, well, that's what's affecting and happening with the brain. So those fear centers, and we talked about that in that the diagram of the brain, that limbic system, it significantly increases in size, and so that's how you see some of those symptoms that look similar to like that post-traumatic stress disorder. It is very much controlling and influencing and not allowing that child to be able to grow and develop that brain like it's like the brain is supposed to during that time frame. This is the time frame that we're supposed to be teaching the engagements. It's where we're supposed to be helping with social interactions, the thinking, how to question, being able to think ahead of what else, the what ifs, those, the creativity, being able to bring in that imagination, all those things that seem like, oh, that's, this is the time of playtime. Yes, they may be doing a lot of play, but it's the that they're learning through that experience and that opportunity. early childhood education. We may think of it as childcare, as simple as having kids be able to be entertained, but it is so much more. And it's for these reasons that it's so much more. This is the time that we're seeing that evolving, developing brain. And what some kids bring to that table is all these things countering that. So if we're going to be able to make those changes, then we must teach in that early childhood education setting how to be able to provide those positive reinforcements, the teaching of relationships, how to help with some of those opportunities to be able to move past the anxiety. Yes, very good, Diane. There, because that's a lot of that fearfulness of having that fight or flight. And if that's the way that they're constantly reacting, they're not getting that opportunity to really be able to develop the brain and be able to do the things that they want to be able to do. So Heather has a comment here in the chat. Professionals need to be trained about the impact of trauma because not all individuals and families are aware or conscious of the trauma or its impacts on their lives. And some individuals and families have a stigma towards some of the incidences of trauma, may not even recognize the existence of a trauma. That is beautifully said. That is exactly why we're having the conversation here today, to really bring to light the importance of trauma, and that this happens to a lot of people. We saw it mentioned it was 64% of individuals indicate they have at least one of the adverse childhood experiences mentioned, and we have many more with four or more. So they're coming to the table. We may not know, may not be able to pick up on it. But if we look for some of those things that we're seeing in the classroom setting that we might feel is, oh, they're just acting out, we must learn to dig deeper. It may not be acting out. It may be that's their stress response to the traumas that they have experienced. So having that anxiety, having the memory issue, having some of those things that are showing up, maybe indications of trauma that they're experiencing, whether it's an acute trauma, whether it's the prolonged trauma. Those are things that we have to be able to teach our system of care, especially for this particular age group, because it's so significant on the long-term impact of individuals, which then will be long-term impact of our communities. So thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So when we talk about some of those symptoms of traumatic and toxic stress, this is how it can show up: clinginess, excessive crying, inability to be soothed, severe separation anxiety, avoidance of people, places, or experiences, indiscriminate attention seeking, sometimes regression into developmental tasks, repetitive play with themes of traumatic events, difficulty feeding or eating, sleeping, toileting, all these different things. So let's take a moment and think about in a childcare setting, whether we're talking about, in in somebody else's home, or at a elementary school, or it's a early, the VPK program. Some of these things you may be seeing in the classroom. You're just saying, oh, this kid is just acting out. Oh, they're just so needy, always wanting to be around. Or why are they going backwards? I thought we just got done with potty training. And you have to think a little bit more. And this is why training in what trauma looks like, and what toxic stress is, and how that affects the brain development, and where this shows up and how this shows up, is really important. Because now, if we know to recognize these things, that we know some of these things could be indicators, then as the individuals, those brain architects in this field, will be able to help provide guidance and assistance, connection to services. And we'll talk a little bit more further on about why it's important for this particular arena of early childhood educators to also be very connected to the providers that are in their network, to be able to connect with, families, and how do we have that communication. Alina, thank you for chiming in. She says that this also made me think of the trauma that a child can experience even prior to birth. Any trauma the mother is exposed to during pregnancy, this can affect the child as well, and many people are not aware of this. That is a great point. And so when we talk about that early childhood, I mean, those are the things that we have to also take into account. Trauma comes in a variety of different ways in those experiences, and that can have long lasting impact. So, if we're able to train the workforce about what to look for, some of these experiences, and that's another great example there is if we understand this and we know some of those things to kind of keep an eye on, then we can work towards those best practices on how do we counter it? How do we make sure that we're putting in those safety guards to make sure that we're pushing out those stressors, the trauma responses to be able to allow that opportunity for the brain development, the social interactions, the emotional regulation. That's why this matters so much, and why I'm, like I said right at the start of this, was so excited about this topic because it gives us that opportunity to actually create long-term change. This is that time of hope. If we see our early educators as brain architects, then and we see the importance of this particular time frame, then we can see just how critical it is that we support the system of care, we invest in the system of care, and we provide that critical training to all of those working in this arena and be able to share that back out with the families as well. So thank you for those that keep chiming in. It's fantastic. Um, so this is also more examples of just specific things that we can see showing up in those early childhood education settings. Um, these are kind of those behavioral things that pop up, and you'll think it's something a behavior issue with a child. It may not be a behavior issue. It is an issue that's showing up because of trauma that have experienced, are continuing to experience, or are around in that toxic stress environment. So being able to know if we're seeing some of these, whether they're physical symptoms, whether it's withdrawal, whether it's that avoidance, whether it's that difficulty in building trust and attachment. These are the things that we need to be able to keep an eye on and make sure that we don't just dismiss us as a kid that's got behavior issues in class. The more we dismiss, the worse that we are in reaching that young child and being able to give them that opportunity to really grow and thrive. So I have a question since I appreciate everybody's been chiming in so far, but I want to ask I know we've got many people here on this line here today. We have almost 200 folks. What does trauma informed care mean to you? We just got done talking about different types of trauma, toxic stress, that impact. Well, now let's think about it. What would it look like to be tra- providing that trauma informed care? So I give folks a second or so here to chime in. Okay, we've got some great comments coming in here. Oh, they're coming in pretty fast. Okay, let's see. All right, so being cautious to not re traumatize. Oh, I love that. Thank you for bringing that up. So, trying to avoid re traumatizing, being sensitive and considerate of trauma responses. Fantastic. Let's see. Um, creating a safe space, providing safety, nurturing, understanding, stability. Those are fantastic. Listen to others to find out why. That's really important too. The why, what is going on, because we need to understand, is this a, prolonged trauma? Is this, did something, one particular event happen, or is it something ongoing? Understanding elements of trauma and symptoms and ways to assist people. Fantastic. Seeing each child and family through a trauma informed lens. Yes. Recognizing the risk and importance of nurturing those at risk with positive influence. Okay. Spending time being attentive. So I see a lot of that sensitivity and being cautious and not re traumatizing. So we're uh, definitely in the right arena here for being considerate with your words, teaching and teachings to help others. I like it. Meeting the person where they are. That's fantastic. Exactly. We have to meet people where they are. Space, being aware and mindful. Those so I love this. These are some great responses on what trauma informed care means to you all and why this matters and what that's important. And it is all the things that you just said, those all have uh, a piece of what trauma informed care is and what that looks like and how that evolves. It is, however, not something that we just wake up with one day and say, oh, this we know how to be trauma informed. We've got this and we're going to go and do better. There's more to it. It's more than just saying we're going to be sensitive. It's more than just saying we're going to be cautious. We have to teach this approach, and we have to provide ongoing training to the workforce to be able to make sure that we're having those conversations about what that means. When we think about that trauma informed care, let's start first with that. And many of you said that being able to build that trust, being able to feel that safety, and being able to overcome that sense of that fear and betrayal. Those are critical components to what bringing in and providing a trauma informed care approach is and what that looks like. And I have a definition here on our next slide. This is something that came through the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And I'm just going to read it. I usually don't like to just read my slides, but I think this is an important one. A child and family service system is one in which all parties involved recognize and respond to the impact of traumatic stress on those who have contact with the system, including children, caregivers, staff, and service providers. Programs and agencies within such a system infuse and sustain trauma awareness, knowledge, and skills into their organizational cultures, practices, and policies. They act in collaboration with all those who are involved with the child, using the best available science to maximize physical and psychological safety, facilitate the recovery or adjustment of the child and family, and support their ability to thrive. So it is all encompassing. It's all beginning with helping those that are in the system of care being able to recognize and respond. It's weaving in and being able to increase opportunities to heighten that awareness of what trauma is, what the knowledge around that, and what those skills are. And also weaving that into your practices and the policies. Policies are great, but if they're not enforced, it doesn't really do much. Practices are okay, but we need the policies to kind of back things up. And so having those opportunities to put in there. And that other piece of that collaboration, making sure that that collaboration is happening and connecting with all of those involved from that system of care of that early childhood education setting to the families to the other providers out in the community and making that connection all the way through. So that is that approach of what being a trauma informed care organization. So the 4 R's of trauma informed care come with it realizes the widespread impact of trauma and paths for recovery. It recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma. It responds by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies and procedures and practices. And it resists that re traumatization. So when we think of that trauma informed care, these are the 4 components of making sure, and it's pretty much all those little pieces that everybody was tying into the chat of making sure that we're increasing and understanding to realize what trauma is and what those symptoms are, being able to respond accordingly with our policies, our procedures, and most critical of all is not to re-traumatize. We're bringing them in to build that safe space to be able to create an environment where they can thrive. In order to thrive, the fear factor has to go away. And so if that fear factor has to go away, we have to avoid that re-traumatization. So building up that system of care to have all of these components is really important here. So that trauma-informed care approach and especially in an early childhood education setting, is one that adopts a holistic approach to addressing what those underlying needs of traumatized children are. There's a variety, of we've covered here already today, of what trauma looks like, whether it's acute trauma, prolonged trauma, what that looks like and how that can show up in your early child education setting is really important to acknowledge, recognize, and also make sure we are teaching and providing skills to those working in this field, working in these centers, to be able to be equipped to address those issues. Um, a trauma informed care approach is one that reduces stress, anxiety, and depression. So it builds an environment that is has that positive feel. It talks about positive reinforcements instead of the um, negative responses. Positive reinforcement to punishment. It's being able to celebrate instead of constantly penalizing. It is finding ways to reduce some of that stress level in that arena. This is also the opportunity to increase the chances to recover and thrive. Just because individuals go through traumatic experiences does not mean they're doomed for life, right? We were talking about these are the buffers, these are the protective factors that we're building in so that individuals that have experienced these traumas will be able to still continue to thrive as long as we're working to build up that support system. And as long as we're, teaching that skill set from all of those that are working in this particular arena. And I think we got another comment here. So we a comment from Donna that she's with the Advocacy Network on Disabilities in South Florida. And oh, fantastic! So you offer free thank you services there. And if you want to put your contact information, I'm sure there are others that are on this audience here today that would love to be able to reach out. This is what I also enjoy about these webinars is we have a lot of opportunities for networking. We're covering individuals all the way from Pensacola all the way down to the Keys and everybody in between. So for those that are working in this space, it's fantastic to be able to share that information with others so that those that are looking for ways to bring this into their organization, they can be able to connect. So thank you for that. The other piece that kind of wraps this up is these opportunities in this early childhood education setting also gives us a chance to prepare children for kindergarten. And while that seems like, oh, well, that should be simple, you need to learn how to color and have fun. Well, there's more to that. And we just talked about all of those reasons why there is more to that. There's a lot that goes into this before age 5 time frame, from the socialization, emotional regulation, conflict resolution, being having that opportunity to want to learn, to question, to inspire, to imagine. All of those things are critical skills needed in order for children to thrive in kindergarten. Kindergarten also looks a little different today than it did when I think I was growing up. There's a lot more recommendations and a lot more academic focus, testing and expectations. So if there's already all those other things that the focus is going to be on, we have to really help our young kids to have some of those needed areas under at least some kind of comfort level before heading into kindergarten. And that is, helping them to regulate those emotions, build the trust in relationships, communicate effectively at, that age group, um, being able to be wanting to learn and be able to move past the fear factor so that they're not always in a fight or flight stance, so that they're blooming as well and learning and being able to thrive. And that means that we all must kind of move and shift in that way of thinking to a more trauma informed mindset. A trauma-informed mindset acknowledges a couple of different things, and it's really important that we move past the whole, oh, don't cry about everything. It's okay, just shake it off, move forward. Being able to kind of give those commands that I think many of us could remember growing up of the just pick yourself up, everything's fine, keep moving forward, instead of actually acknowledging some of the issues that are happening, instead of talking through, working through what are some of the things that matter in their life that's happening right now, and what are some of the things that really are important to digest a little bit more, unpack a little bit more, to be able to understand, well, how do you deal with this situation? And so it's a different approach because it's really easy to say, oh, stop the crying. Well, there might be a reason why crying is happening that has nothing to do with just what happened in the classroom, but more to do with what happened before they got to the classroom. It might be something that happened more with what happened the week before, or whatever the situation is. So we as a culture have to shift from that mindset of how we have been, responding and reacting, to instead unpacking and being able to say, you know what? Let's question, let's ask, let's dig a little deeper. Let's pick up on the cues of what are some of those things that we're seeing happening in that classroom, whether it's we're talking about, the 3 to 4 year old classroom, or an informal classroom, where group of kids sitting in a circle in somebody's caregiving house, whatever that is. I'd say classroom just the first setting that comes to mind, but any of those settings when we're talking about early childhood education. So just being able to just shift that mindset. We just talked about how, before the age of 5, 90% of that brain is done developing. So we have to be able to be more mindful with how is this affecting that development, and instead of being so reactive. Oh, I like that conscious discipline. Yes, being able to, of course, correct when situations arise, but not as a penalty. But also, we use things like that positive reinforcement, finding ways to really reduce some of that stress, anxiety, as we mentioned in the previous few slides, to set up a place that young kids feel safe, moving them away from that fight or flight stance so that they can keep moving in that process. So it's easier said than done, because I mean, I even know with some of with my own kids, sometimes I want to say, oh, stop the whining, stop the arguing, but we need to unpack them, because if we don't intentionally stop ourselves, go through, it makes it very hard for it to be an entire paradigm shift in a system of care. So what we need to be doing is, as the stakeholders, the workforce, and where we are, is shift a little bit with how we approach things, and to take that trauma informed mindset instead of how things used to be. If we went with how things used to be, we're going to always get what we have or worse. So we want to see things better. And so understanding what this looks like, and understanding the impact on brain development, on the opportunities that these young kids are going to be able to have or not have, we need to change that approach. And so as we think about that, we want to be able to find, how do we look at, and I think somebody put that in the chat about what does trauma informed care look like to you, and someone typed in, it's looking at families through a trauma informed lens. And that is so important right there. Having that opportunity to take that trauma informed lens approach gives us an opportunity to unpack a little bit more about well, why are they reacting this way? What is happening that is creating this type of situation, this reaction, whether it's a emotional reaction, a physical reaction. We need to kind of change through what this looks like, and understand that there is an impact of stress and trauma on the brain, and that impact affects regulation of emotions. It affects their ability to learn. It affects behavior. The more we understand that relationship between trauma and some of that academic achievement or problem behaviors, the better we will be to meet the needs of the children and be able to help to address some of the issues, whether it's assistance in how to regulate those emotions, whether it's assistance in how to communicate feelings and emotions, and whether it's the support on how do they move past the fear factor. They're coming in to these early learning education, these early education settings from various different places. Sometimes you'll get everybody from the same environment, but even if they're coming from the same environment, everybody has a different home life. And you don't know what happens necessarily before they walk into the door. So, being able to make sure that we take that into account. And it's not to say that what we're saying here is just do whatever, let kids get away with everything. And that's not this approach. This approach is be intentional. Think about what the might be happening here. Don't be reactive to the things that you're seeing happening in the early education setting. Dig a little deeper, look through it with a trauma informed lens about what may be happening. What are the things that you should be thinking about? Picking up on if you're seeing enough of those ways that the things show up when trauma is an influence. We have a whole list, several slides of those, but kind of thinking through like how many of those items do you see happening in this classroom with the student or happening in this after school program or happening in your home because you're caring for a couple of kids for others. It doesn't matter where the setting is making sure that you're being intentional, finding out what's happening, looking at what environments they may be coming from and what the why that matters. So if we realize that and we think about some of these behaviors and how they're reacting physically, emotionally, outbursts, then what we might find is that some of those disruptions are their coping mechanisms because that's all they know of how to cope with what the struggles that they're dealing with are. So if we start to see some of these reactions from them, these behaviors from them as their way of coping, then it helps us to say, okay, let's take a step back and see how can we work with these students? How do we help them find more healthy coping mechanisms where we're building them up for success instead of keeping them down and having them be labeled as a problematic child and they get into kindergarten and end up with a slew of behavioral issues. So the more we can do to help with that and understand that, the better it will be. So we're kind of taking this paradigm shift. We're shifting to try to have that trauma informed lens approach. We're moving to um, changing the way that we think and the assumptions that we make. We're shifting the what's wrong with you. That assumes an inherent flaw within the person, the judgment, being critical, being problem focused, to moving more to a trauma informed, being curious and aware of that there could be a possible trauma that's happening, not jumping to conclusions, and then moving it on even more to strength based, where it changes the way that we look at the behavior, reframes those situations into a positive manner, and gives control instead of taking it away. We're there to help to see why they may be responding this way, why we may be seeing that showing up in these early childhood education settings in ways that look like uh, anxiety, disruptive behaviors, memory issues, and those really are stemming from something else that's happening in their life that's outside of their control, whether it was a one time major traumatic event or prolonged ongoing traumatic experiences that are affecting them over time. So it's really important that we take a better look at how this works. We're shifting the way that we are approaching it, thinking of it. And it's, of course, easier said than done because we are people, and people are reactionary. And so, of course, sometimes our first reaction would be, sit down, stop that. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? Those types of comments and reactions are not the kinds of things that put us into a trauma informed approach. Those are how we may have been doing it, but we have to move from that to becoming more trauma informed to then becoming more strength based, where what we're doing is looking at and reframing what's happening to understand what may be the underlying factors, and how do we take those approaches to really shift that um, mindset so that we can become more informed and be better situated to be those brain architects. And I'm just gonna keep, I love that concept, being the brain architect. Because if we know that the brain, that 90% of your brain is developed before the age of 5, we're talking about a setting where the majority of everybody there is under 5. It's a huge percent of our population in the country. We have this opportunity to really make an impact and a difference on our next generation coming in. So when we think about those that are 5 and under today, we're talking about our Gen Alphas. And so if we put these practices in place, if we switch that mindset to be trauma informed, we may see significant changes for this generation later into adolescence and adulthood. So it really is a kind of an exciting opportunity for us to take this challenge to ensure that we're educating on what trauma informed care is, what that looks like, and how do we make that become a reality for how we operate in our society today. So it starts by, we need to make some of these shifts. We need to um, move through what we need to do. So let's take a look at these 3 examples here. So we have Maria, young Maria, who is constantly tattling, and the response is, well, why is she so bossy? Why is she so controlling? And the reaction is very much to how we used to be in that response. And so what we see here is that we want to shift that way of seeing, that lens that we view Maria. And instead, Maria is a great motivator. She knows what she wants and is effective in getting things done. So it's the same situation, it's the same person. It's just the way that we are choosing to shift that mindset and that trauma informed lens. And this, if we take this approach with all students, for all young kids that are coming through, then we have that opportunity to affect everybody. Not everybody's going to come in with the same amount of trauma, but if we take the approach the same with all, we will see that effect. So we take our second example, Chris. Chris is always complaining about something. It seems like nothing is ever good enough. Chris is just this complainer. If we keep with that same lens of looking at Chris as this complainer, this problem maker, this person that just is just never going to be happy, we're not going to be setting Chris up for success. We're going to help to create a stigma on him that is going to be Chris against the world. But if we move that a little bit and shift that way of looking at that behavior, we instead look at Chris thrives on change and has a really good eye for what isn't working and how it can be improved. It'd be great for quality improvement. So, same person, same situation, but our lens of viewing what's happening has changed. Oh, I like that. Chris has high expectations, looks for excellence. So, it's not about changing what happened, it's about changing how we're viewing what happened. So let's take our third example. Kai is fixated on upping up everybody. He basically steals everybody else's ideas and makes them his own. This is just a person that is always trying to be in the spotlight, trying to be the best, trying to do all these things. If we keep up with that view of Kai constantly being like that, it's a very negative light, and that negative light is going to have an impact on Kai moving forward. Oh, I love that you guys are chiming in on these things. And yes, that's a that's a great way of looking at it. He's open to change and looking for other ways. Very good. So, so Kai is easily inspired and has a knack for improving existing projects with creative ideas. It's all about how we shift our view and our lens on what is happening. And it is such a powerful and a really embracing approach that takes away problem kids, because that's how we were seeing them with the first descriptors, takes away problem kids, and instead we see excellent kids with potential to thrive and really be able to have success in life. All from just the way in which we look at how that lens that we see them in. We didn't change what they did, we didn't change who they are, we just our lens, just how we look at them and what we took away as that from what they did. So that is so powerful right there because it really is so easy to look and pick on the negative. But if we shift it and we did this for every child, then we're going to get those children that have gone through trauma. We're going to have those that have not had as much trauma. But at the end, if we take this approach with all will find that positive outcome and success, which is fantastic. So being trauma informed, that's a big part of this webinar here today is what being in trauma informed is, what that looks like, why it matters, and why we want to really bring that in as early on as possible. We're talking about that early childhood education. It's really an opportunity for us to be able to put in place a way that improves that opportunity for success. It allows for more children to thrive. And really, in long term, if we want to think about this is our return on investment. We're going to have a fantastic workforce in the future if we do all these things in the now of this time period. If we think about these early childhood education centers, whether it's a center, a school, a house, wherever that is, as the first slide that we talked about, what are those different settings? Doesn't matter where the setting is. If we bring in this trauma informed approach, being trauma informed, then we will see that success because they're the perfect places to buffer against these negative impacts of trauma. These tend to be those places that you see children are in those settings way longer than they are when at home. As we think about just regular school, they're at school for 8 hours a day, and some go to extended day afterwards, and so they spend the majority of their time in these places. So in these places where we have the majority of time with children, especially early childhood education, where 90% of the brain is being developed before age 5, we have that opportunity to really create this change, which is fantastic. And it's ideal because this is the time that we're helping to learn skills, for anywhere from how to use utensils, tying shoes, to having a conversation, sharing, working or playing together. All of those things gives us that opportunity to teach, to role model, and to reinforce, which is fantastic. So as we go through, making sure that we're using this approach for all of these different settings is going to be really important. So trauma-informed care is an evidence-informed approach. There's so much research behind it. There's a lot of support, a lot of data. I tried to leave this presentation today without as much data because everybody's eyes start to glaze over with too many numbers. But these things are proven and effective, and we have a ton of research to show what that looks like and how often we see those positive outcomes. So if we integrate trauma-informed care services into early childhood education programs, we're going to see those positive outcomes. It's an opportunity also to build partnerships with these early childhood education areas and community service providers, because there's only so much these early educators can do before we also need to bring in the support of those that are in the provider arena, to bring in some of the additional services that are needed, whether they are therapeutic services, whether there are other types of support services for not just the child, but the family as well. And then being able to offer professional development opportunities. Bringing in that trauma informed care approach is not a one and done. You don't just walk in one day, hand everybody out, here's your manual, and here's your manual. And all of a sudden, boom, we're trauma informed. It's an ongoing process. There's always more room for improvement. We're always finding new information. Research is always evolving and identifying even better best practices. So if we are able to do that, if we're able to continue that process, then we're really going to be able to um, build up this system of care that is ongoingly improving and supporting. And each generation to come through will have even in better increased opportunities for success, which is fantastic. So we start thinking about this environment of early childhood education and what are the things that we're bringing in. So we're talking about fostering the positive school. And I say school, it could be environment, doesn't have to be a specific official school. It could be community center where they're offering early childhood education, childcare, or education setting. It could be somebody's home, but it provides that opportunity to foster that positive climate. And then it also gives us that opportunity to build strong relationships. Some of the kids that come into this early childhood education, they may not have strong relationships. Some may not. And so if we're going to build a positive environment for all students to thrive, then it's building up this positive climate, building up strong relationships, and then being able to see how all of that will lead to an environment that is where they're understood, they're supported, and they're valued. Opportunities that allow for all of that to come together and take place is what will help to see this resilience of the children. It will see that opportunity to be prepared for kindergarten, to be able to take kindergarten as that first step into success that allows the rest of that school years to be positive. If we just can put in these components and create these environments to allow them to then be prepared for what's to come ahead, that will be what will lead to a lot of these positive outcomes, which is fantastic. Oh, I see. We've got some more comments here. Thank you for those that are typing in there. I'm sorry if I missed a few. See, so we got, sorry, it keeps going up. So early childhood education staff may need to do inner work, so they may have a trauma-informed care approach as well. Absolutely. So that's also part of building that ongoing professional development of having those opportunities to grow and be able to do more. The more you learn about this approach, because it's not so easy. You don't just go, okay, today I'm gonna be trauma informed and everything will be perfect. You have to be very intentional with the practices, and until you get into the habit. So the practice takes a while until it becomes the habit, then becomes the way that you do respond. But it does take time and it does take effort. Um, Let's see, for reading students, wouldn't it be motivational to have a short positive affirmation posted on a board for each student? That's a great idea. The positive reinforcement is such a powerful approach to seeing these outcomes. You see that in a lot of the different theories behind behavioral theory, a lot of the stuff that you see in various of the evidence-based programs that have been developed for not just substance use but also others. The good behavior game is another one that has been out there, and it does put a lot of effort and focus in on that positive affirmation. It's amazing just how much just those small positive reinforcements of you're doing this great, you're doing that great, this is what good job on this, how much of a influence that is on kids, but on grown-ups as well. It is fantastic. So yes, I love that you added that. Let's see. So yeah, another one for encourage them, positive affirmations. Absolutely. reframing their behavior and offering replacement suggestions. Yeah, so again, keeping it on that positive approach and view rather than the negative consequence side. And this is not to say that there shouldn't be some consequences, there shouldn't be correction of behaviors, but it's the way that you approach it, the way that you view it, instead of being very negative, fear based. It is taking approach more positive, more intentional to be able to have that opportunity. So, as we create this environment where children are understood, they feel supported, they feel valued, those help to counter some of those struggles that they come to the table with. Um, so, when we talk about effective practices in that early childhood education setting, whether you're talking about a school setting because where they offer VPK, whether it's at an elementary school because they have Head Start working there, whether it's an a community center because that's where they offered some childcare, or it's in someone's home that's offering childcare there. Um, these practices are important and powerful in all of those different settings. So being able to create that safe and predictable environments, and we talk about some of the traumas and some of the things that brings. Stability is definitely something that's lacking. It's that instability sometimes that they are experiencing, and they come to your setting, whether your school or somebody's home or a community center. That instability is what they're meeting you with. And so being able to provide that environment that is more stable, that is safe, to help them move past the fight or flight kind of position will really help. Being able to foster those positive relationships. They may not have some positive relationships in their life, or not a lot of them, and they may need help to figure out how to build those things. So, is being able to have that opportunity, and then being able to promote emotional regulation. We don't wake up one day and have all the answers on how do we compose ourselves, and when we get mad, we instantly know. We just say, "Well, that was not nice," and we move forward. We react, and when you're young, you have more of those emotions, and if you're not being taught skill sets on how to communicate those emotions, how to share out or be able to move past some of those emotions, then it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to lead to some of the chaos that happens in classroom settings, or in school, or some of the issues that evolve at home or in other situations. Emotions are not bad. That's one thing that is really important when teaching about this, is to have an emotion is not bad. To be mad is not bad. To be angry is not bad. To be sad is not bad. Helping them to understand how to react. What are the ways that they can healthily, with a respond to the emotions that they're experiencing, that is in a way that's not going to be causing issues or problems. You can be mad, and that is okay. Going and smashing everything, not so okay, but helping them to understand what that regulation looks like. What are some alternatives for dealing with the emotions? How do we help with that? Being able to support social emotional development, providing that individualized support. And then while we're working with our young kids in this age, it's also important to help find support to educate families and caregivers. And that's why collaborating with the community partners, those providers, the organizations that provide treatment services, support services, therapy, resources, all of those are going to be really critical to bring into this environment, so that you're helping to build a positive, safe environment for young kids to thrive. But then you're also giving the resources and skills back out to the families and caregivers, so that when they leave the environment that you have control on, they go to an environment where you don't have the control for, they're at least going with supports and resources and connections to services. Um, I see we've got another comment here. Let's see. Like a bank account, positive reinforcement is a deposit and redirections are withdrawals. Be conscious to have more deposits than withdrawals. I like the idea of deposits. The positive reinforcements help to have more than just one thing that they can go back and say, oh, I did that one thing right. I did many things right. We had many opportunities for positives for what they did. And being able to have that sense of self being not just the negative that they may be coming to your table with. There may be a lot of negative in their personal life, in their household, that the positives that they see of themselves, they're only seeing and getting when they come to your early childhood education center. So that's really important. Um, See, we got somebody else put here, I believe, in addition to everything else discussed, but this to be reiterated and taught to childcare providers and parents. Yes, absolutely. Find a lot of providers struggle to understand promoting and supporting emotional regulation and emotional development versus making it making it punitive. That's a really important piece because it is really important to help teach that emotional regulation piece. Because, like I said, we're not born with that instinct that we know exactly how to respond. We are taught that, whether it's through a formal approach or just a reaction approach of what is allowable, acceptable, and not. But we don't just wake up one day and know exactly how to respond. We need support, we need assistance. And these young kids really would benefit so much if we bring in with the lens that we ourselves also don't react to, like the three examples we put in there. We don't react to them with a negative. We take that moment, we become more intentional with that response, and we're able to make sure that um, we are modeling the things that we're trying to teach them. So another question, how do you achieve that when you are working with childcare providers that are resistant to changing their perspectives? So herein lies one of the big challenges is while we can share this information out, it does require a whole shift in mindset, shifting to that trauma informed care lens, and it requires the buy-in of leadership. So the hope is the more we can share this out and provide that reasoning for why um, you would want to have this be the way that all early childhood education centers um, move through the system of care. That's how we're going to get through this. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of effort and support, and it isn't always easy. But we have enough in the research to show why it is important and why, if we don't put these things into practice, if we do not bring in the understanding of being trauma informed, then we're going to continue to see the number of individuals that are in need of treatments for mental health, substance use, and other things for increase over time. There's a lot of different ways that we could provide this safety net this early on to have such a huge return on investments. And it's getting the buy-in of leadership, not just the people that are the supervisors at a center, but the owners, the those that are making the more policy related approaches. Um, I'll find some information. I'll put my contact information here at the end because I do have some research on the cost effectiveness of using a trauma-informed care approach because it does. There's so many benefits to it that reduce a lot of the health issues, a lot of the um, issues that happen with staff turnover, with trauma informed care approaches. This can be beneficial for what we're talking about in this particular case of early childhood education, but trauma informed care approach can be for any organization. And they do have a lot of different models and reasons why you want to have that. But yes, Heather, I'll give you my contact information. Be happy to share what I have. So we're gonna share here a couple of proactive strategies. I just put classroom because I keep thinking school, but it doesn't have to be school. It could be the community center, somebody's house. Um, but it is a way to share some of these practices and approaches that we can think of when we are in a setting where we have multiple kids and we're doing either we're child caring or doing some education. But these are the ways to some practices that seem to be helpful. So we've said in the previous slides about the importance of stability and safety. So making sure as you're setting up a space that you are able to be predictable and have a routine. And while it may seem like, oh, it's boring to have a routine, it actually provides that stability that many young kids are really wanting to have in their life. It also helps to set that expectation. They know this is going to happen. There are no surprises because while we may think surprises can be fun, surprises are not fun for everybody. And if you are having someone who has experienced a lot of trauma or they have a lot of toxic stress in their life, surprises may not be the thing to bring into your setting. But having something that's predictable, having routine, as that opportunity for stability. And then this one of being able to respond versus react to behavior. We shared, the ways that we see the children, the different lens of we see them. This one being the tattletale problem maker. To no, instead of being a tattletale, we're saying that this is an individual. Again, being on the positive, that's a great motivator, and she knows what she wants and wants to see a lot of these things done. She's not being bossy. She knows what she sees. It's called leadership skills. I've always told my daughter when she said, "Well, so and so says I'm bossy." Well, is it bossy or are you exhibiting some great leadership skills? If you're making suggestions for what to do, we're quick to make it into a negative, saying, "Oh, stop telling people what to do." We're just wanting to help and assist. That is a positive, not a negative. And so it's the way we respond to something versus the way we react. And that could be for something that's somebody says in the classroom or your whatever circle setting. Um, Reacting, remember all those little eyes are looking right back at you. You're supposed to be role modeling. So if you react to the what are you thinking, that approach might not be the most trauma informed response. And that's more of a reaction versus trying to figure out what's happening, what does that look like, maybe taking them aside, and also moving past the punitive uh, reactions and threat reactions and those kinds of things. It's also really important to notice things. Like we went through a listing of different ways that these stressors and trauma can exhibit themselves in physical or emotional ways. If you start to notice multiple of those things on the list starting to show up, that may be the time for more conversation to try to unpack what's happening, reaching out to the caregivers, bringing in some resources to share back. It's really important. And then being able to validate feelings and emotions and to be fair. As I say, an emotion is not bad. It is not bad to be mad. It's not bad to be excited. It's not bad to be sad. It's not bad to even be a little bit anxious. Emotions are the things that are inside of us. It's the way in which we respond to those emotions, not react. So we're responding with them in a way that we need to help to provide some healthy ways of responding to the emotions and how to regulate those emotions versus the immediate reaction they get of, I'm mad, so I'm going to hit my head on the desk. That's a reaction, and that reaction is not a very positive one, and not one that you want to um, really be able to keep having. You want to have positive ways that they are able to deal with those emotions in a way that they can process and a way that they're not just pushing it to the side, because we also don't want to be the ones that say, well, Len, dry up your eyes, there's no crying, okay, we had enough of that, suck it up, buttercup. you know those responses, and I don't know if some of you probably were giggling with that, like, wait, I think I've heard that growing up. Yes, that's the way that we sometimes responded before, where we said, the emotions don't matter, uh, don't cry like a girl, or there's no crying in sports. We don't dismiss feelings. We help to process, we help to assist in understanding, but we don't dismiss them. Because if we start to dismiss them, we start to bottle them up, they will eventually show back up in a very negative way. So these are just some proactive approaches. So I know some of you are chiming in, and I have a question on my next slide. So let me see what some of the comments have been. The sanctuary model is amazing. Yes, I do like that. Oh, you're welcome. Someone said thank you for being an advocate for trauma-informed practices in early education. Uh, it's such an important time. And like I said, I was so excited to talk about this topic because it is different from other webinars where we're always talking about the after effects. We're talking about, people growing up, dealing with addiction, mental health, all of these things after the fact. Here, we have an opportunity to talk about what can we do to prevent some of those things from happening? What can we do to help safeguard, to help our young kids be able to thrive? And then for those that love the cost savings, if we keep doing this, we have massive cost savings further down the line because there will be more productive citizens in our community being able to bring in a wealth of knowledge, information, skill sets. And also, we won't have them so much so in the services side of needing supports constantly. And someone else, I tell my client it is okay to have their feelings, but it's how they handle those feelings that makes a difference. Exactly. It's the feelings are not wrong. They're not bad. It's learning how to deal with those feelings in a way that's going to be healthy, in a way that's not going to cause you problems, in a way that actually will help you deal with it and not just keep reliving the feeling. So fantastic. Prevention versus cure. I like that. Yes. Well, I do love that people are chiming in because I have actually another question for you all. We are getting close towards the end, but there's just a few more slides, and I want to kind of think about this because some of you had mentioned the importance to not re-traumatize. So my question is, what do you think could be a trauma trigger in an early childhood education setting? All right. Oh, we got lots of people chiming in. Okay, so yelling, yes. Noise, saying no. Uh, re- Remember, labels are forever, especially for children. So important. Absolutely. So yes, a lot of you're all with the same yelling, fighting, noise, the screaming, a lot of yelling. We're all on the same page here. The yelling, lockdowns. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. That has definitely been something that, while I can understand that that is a necessity for some of the situations, it breaks my heart that the approaches some of the schools have taken on the lockdowns. I had one of our neighbors that started kindergarten came home one day after experiencing a lockdown and told his mom, "Mom, today I almost died at school," because that was his response and reaction to that lockdown. And so it just reminds me, we have to think about how some of these things really do affect young kids, and we may see it as a necessity of safety. That's not necessarily how they see it as a young kid experiencing something like that. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like a lot of different examples here. There's words and tone and yelling and noise. Um, the teacher voice. Oh, yes, that teacher voice definitely can do something. Changes in staffing, schedules, absolutely. So we're going to go through some of these here. So there are some unexpected potential trauma triggers that I wanted to bring up here today because they're not necessarily things that we're trying to do to traumatize or re-traumatize, but there are things that sometimes happen, and we have to just part of this process of becoming trauma informed and using that trauma lens is realizing that some of the ways that we operate may not be the most effective ways and actually may be problematic for trying to reach these kids and helping them move past that flight or fight or flight position to being able to thrive. Rest time. It is really bizarre that we say, rest time actually can be something that may be a trigger, because some students can be comforted by, turning down the lights and sounds of, those little machines that make little noises to help you, the white noise to help you sleep. But for others, this type of environment may not necessarily be that, because they may have experienced abuse, where when there is quiet and the lights go down, that's when the abuse happens. And so we may not think of that ever as a possibility of triggering. It actually may be just that. So if students are, or some of these kids are resistant to laying down or settling down, or you see they're uncomfortable, this is that opportunity to kind of course correct. And if others are okay with it, but you see one or maybe two that are just not comfortable with it, they're getting back up, they're not able to calm down, and they're reacting with some of those things that we saw, is to be able to say, okay, let's do something else for you. Let's use this time for you to do drawing or playing quietly. We're still going to have quiet so that you still have the rest time, but maybe it's redirecting them on what they're going to focus on. Because to me, that was also, oh yeah, like you said, Tessa, I just didn't really consider that. But we have to think about it if we're going to be shifting our mindset about um, what it looks like for things that can trigger. That's one of them. um, Safety lessons, drills, and field trips. So I gave you that example with my young little neighbor. It was just so heartbreaking the day he came and said, "Well, Mom, I almost died at school today," and this because they had one of those code red drills at school for the active shooters, and just started kindergarten. He was one of the youngest kids who had just turned 5, and this was a first experience, and it was very frightening. And where the takeaway was that they almost died, and so while we know there are reasons for safety that we put these things in place, it's really important to come up with emergency drills where you talk about what the process is, explaining not just sudden ones, especially for new kids or and young ones, starting school in kindergarten, or even some of the schools that have the VPK, Head Start, all those attached to the schools. This may be a terrible experience for them, and that they may not know about that. And so it can trigger them. Class assignments. While it seems like, well, of course we have class assignments. Can you do things like get to know you? And especially for the young kids of wanting to share a little bit about who they are, it's like bring in a picture of yourself or bring in a picture of your family. Bring in something that means uh, that is important to you. Bring this in, and they're having to talk about who they are, their family tree, or something personal about where they came from. And while it may be a wonderful experience in the in theory that this is a way to have each child get to share about them, it may be triggering for some, because again, we don't know what people are coming to the table with. We don't know what the situations are necessarily. um, Even if we have met the parent or caregiver and everything seems fine, you just don't know some of those situations. So just being mindful and finding ways to work around some of these things, or being what having opportunities to kind of give other experiences of how do you still share things without it be something that is you know problematic for you to share out. Reading materials. Reading materials is another one of those things that could be problematic, even though it's important for of course students to learn. And especially as we're getting into the way kindergarten is these days, that you have to come to the table already being able to read and write and all these things. So, and books are important, and teaching those things are important, but always before assigning a reading material, think about some of the things that could affect the children in your group, whether it's because of different accommodations that they have some challenges with reading, or there may be topics in the materials that they're going to be reading about that could be problematic for them. So it's one of those things that nothing in this list is just like, wow, this to me, of course we wouldn't do that. They're all things that we would do. We would see this, but it's all about using that lens of taking that trauma informed approach and making sure we're making the best decisions for not traumatizing, for not causing more issues. And that leads us to somebody else here put in there about the granddaughter not being able to wear the light up tennis shoes because of the lockdown safeties. And so also that kind of goes into like some of those sensory triggers. There may be things that can trigger different things. And so it's important that we kind of think about that. In how that could come out, and not everybody is able to regulate things the same. When we talked about some of the different ways that trauma shows up in physical or emotional events, it could be different sensitivities to the triggers. And so some may be coming from a home that is full of toxic stress, and some of the things may overwhelm them, and so overstimulation may be a problem, and their approach to cope will be not necessarily one of the best approaches. So it's just being mindful of some of these things and being intentional with them. So like like the noises, many of you mentioned noise being something, and so loud pep rallies or getting very excited, and a lot of that noise that can overstimulate and cause some re-triggering for some of these young kids. And so just being a little bit mindful of that. It's not to say none of these things should be done. It's just to say we should always think of it through that lens of what could take place. What are some of the things that are important? And then the teacher voice, and somebody did put this in the chat, the teacher voice. Um, and it's one of those things that it can definitely be a way to catch attention from the young kids in your class, in your circle. They're getting all rambunctious, and all of a sudden the voice goes up a few octaves, and you're like, all right, everybody sit down. But that shift and change can actually be problematic for some of these kids that may be having some issues that they're coming to the table with, because it could mimic rejection, intimidation, that fear, and they may go into a very reactive response, that stern voice, and then you will find some of those reactions they're doing not to be very helpful in the classroom setting. So just being cautious about some of these things is not to say that these things can't be done, shouldn't be done, or any of those things. It's more about, let's think about things through this trauma informed lens and make sure that we are um, keeping that in mind as we move forward. So as we move into these next few pieces, it's now that we're talked about what trauma informed care is, the impact and influence of trauma and toxic stress on brain development for young kids, the fact that their brains are 90% of kids' brains under the age of 5 is when that development is taking place. This is where we find the next place is to make sure that these early childhood education centers, whether it's school, at home, community center, we're also building the bridge across the community, making sure that we're increasing efforts for screening, referral, and treatment, connecting with community mental health programs. There are also infant and early childhood mental health providers, home visiting programs, linking with primary care offices, finding other social services supports that help families, because when we talk about some of those traumas, that can be also related to food scarcity, it could be some abuse, those type of homelessness. Those all have an influence on some of the things that are happening to these young kids that are coming in. So making sure that we're connecting across the board there. And then the ongoing professional development is so important. I've added a couple of links here to some good places to find additional information. There is actually an upcoming early childhood conference that's happening 0 to 3. If you're not familiar with the 0 to 3 initiative, it's fantastic. So wealth of information, great opportunities for continuing professional development there through their sites. They include a lot of different webinars, resources, articles. It's fantastic. So if you haven't checked them out before, I would highly recommend doing that. But making sure that as this professional development is going on, making that an approach to really shift that understanding and the mindset of being trauma informed, making sure to work towards also shifting some of the practices. There's a lot of different ways that we could continue the conversation and this work. And while today we're talking a lot about early childhood education, trauma informed care and trauma informed approaches are fantastic for all different organizations across. And then with all of this, what is so great about taking this approach is being trauma informed is great for all. It supports all students, all children, all demographics, all over the place. It is there to help create that resiliency for all. So I have my little superhero characters there because this approach and this setting means you're putting in opportunities to nurture positive relationships, you're encouraging problem solving, you're building a resilient model, you're promoting a growth mindset, teaching emotional regulation, and celebrating efforts and progress. So it is definitely, hands down, so wonderful for all kids, all students, and really all organizations. And with all of this, we're able to do so many different things. And I hope this information here today has been helpful to you all. I've included my contact information here. I know we're at our 1 o'clock. So Robert, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close us out and let them know about the CEUs.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and the information that you shared with us today. Everyone, please note a couple of business items before we conclude. I am posting the link to the survey in the chat. I will post it again momentarily. Additionally, when I end the webinar, your web browser will populate a message that looks like this. It says the host or presenter would like WebEx meetings to open a website on your computer. This is WebEx trying to automatically redirect you to the evaluation. So click continue to automatically be redirected. You must sign into your FATA account to complete the evaluation. If this is your first webinar with us and you do not have an account, you can register for one at no cost. You may do so by clicking haven't registered yet underneath the sign in menu. Please use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in FATA's system. This is the only way to connect your attendance at today's webinar with your FATA profile. For CEs to be reported to CE Broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, please provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or update your license number, you may do so by logging in and clicking edit on the professional information section of your profile. You will get a third opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. As a reminder, the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Friday, February 28th, 2025. For assistance with account login, account registration, or evaluation completion, fill out a contact us form or email training@floridabha.org. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be posted to the professional development section of your profile in your FATA account within 30 business days. You must have attended the entire webinar and completed the evaluation for a statement of credit. We are not permitted to provide partial credit. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again, Kathleen, for a wonderful presentation. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and please hold for the evaluation.